Good morning. This is Barry Jones with Standards Plus History Academy. If this is your first time to catch one of my episodes, um, feel free to browse. This is episode 22. We are currently working our way through the JFK assassination, and we are doing it methodically, taking it step by step. And it's going to be a long journey, but that is intentional. I am a high school history teacher. I teach U.S. history, world history, U.S. government. I also offer a class in the JFK assassination, an elective. You can check out my website, standardsplushistoryacademy.com. I have curriculum materials there for all four of those classes. If you homeschool, it's available. I also offer my services as an online teacher, certified online teacher in the same four classes. If that's something that interests you, I have books available. There's podcasts that I do pretty much on a regular basis. Also, some blogs and things of that nature. So feel free to check out my website. And feel free to comment as you watch this on YouTube. Comments are welcome because it sparks a dialogue, and that's ultimately what I'm trying to create is a dialogue. I don't believe there's anybody out there that, I think I mentioned this in episode 21 yesterday, that I don't think there's anyone out there who is a complete and total repository of all the information related to the JFK assassination. It's just too much. It's too voluminous. And so we try to learn from each other. And that's the point of this. Today's topic, and if you're familiar, you know that I have usually start off with a question. And this is oftentimes a question that my students have asked me through the years. And today's question, this is one of the topics I have to break through the barrier of skepticism. There's a lot of skepticism about this topic, and but it's really important to understand it, because if you don't, a lot of the sheep dipping and the cover story and the framing of Lee Harvey Oswald doesn't make sense. But if you do understand it, boy, everything else just kind of falls right into place. And one of the questions my students will ask me, if I even mention this, body doubles or doppelgangers, they snicker and they're like, "Are you serious? Well, who uses body doubles or doppelgangers?" It's like a movie or something. It's make believe. And so what I try to do with my students, and I'm going to try to do here, is I just take it episode by episode, or both scenario by scenario, situation by situation, and show them the witness testimony, what they see, compare dates, and realize that it's not an isolated incident. This is happening over and over and over again. Therefore, it is a pattern. Therefore, it must be intentional. And of course, that always is an eye-opening experience to understand that your own government is in the business not of following evidence to a conclusion, but of creating the evidence to create the conclusion. When you finally can wrap your mind around that your own government does that, it really changes the way you read the news. It really changes the way you view what the Justice Department says about people who are suspected of this or that, arrested for this or charged with that. You start to question and wonder, okay, is this legit? Because they've lied before, and they've used methods to set people up before, and even witnesses who think they saw that person, was it really that person? It makes you think. It puts you in a little bit of a I go back to that title that I used for my book, Wilderness of Mirrors: What's Real and What's Not Real. So the question I get from my students, and as I said, it's a very skeptical question. They kind of look at me sideways. They say, "Were Oswald doppelgangers being used to frame Oswald and Lee Harvey Oswald? Were there body doubles out there? Was that really happening? Is that even possible?" So I want to, we're going to take this slowly. I'm not going to rush through it. I'm not going to try to do too much in any one single sitting, because I want you to really, I really want you to get this. This is important. I do the same thing with my students. Um, and the answer to that is yes. Okay. But now let me support that answer. On June 3rd, 1960, this is sort of the entry into this world of Oswald doppelgangers. And it is in the form of a memo by FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. And it's basically an intergovernmental memo. He's sending it from the FBI to the State Department. He says, quote, an imposter is using Lee Harvey Oswald's birth certificate. And here is a copy of the memo. And you can see at the top of the memo, I've put a red box around who's the author of the memo and who the memo is about, the subject, obviously Oswald. And then the last paragraph is that statement, something about there is a possibility that an imposter is using Oswald's birth certificate, and any current information the Department of State may have concerning a subject will be appreciated. So what has happened is the FBI has been alerted to the fact that somebody out there is using Oswald's personal information. And they know that the real Lee Harvey Oswald is in Russia at this time. And we've told that story, how he went over as a fake defector sent there by the CIA as an intelligence asset. He was there from 59 of October to June 1 of 62. So almost 3 years. So, and of course, this was not a secret mission. This was well publicized back home when he tried to renounce his citizenship, when he offered to give military secrets to the Soviets. Newspaper writers wrote stories about it. And so it was in newspapers back home, and it was a pretty well publicized deal. So anyway, enough for the FBI to notice when somebody else is using his exact same information here in America. So that's our first alert that this is happening. On January 20 of 1961, about 6 months later, we have our first occurrence that ends up being, with witnesses who come forward and tell the FBI exactly what happened. And it happens in New Orleans. Well, of course, everything seems to happen in New Orleans, and that's where he's from. But again, at this point in time, Oswald is in Russia, and this is the Bolton Ford dealership in New Orleans, Louisiana. On January 20, 2 men visited this Bolton Ford dealership in New Orleans, and they were speaking with the assistant manager, a man named Oscar Deslat, and said they were interested in purchasing 10 Ford Econoline trucks for the Cuban organization that they represented. It was called the Free Democrats of Cuba. According to Oscar Deslat, he was pretty sure that's his recollection of it. He said it was the Free Democrats of Cuba or some such organization. So Deslat went to his boss, the manager, Fred Sewell, and told him the story. And Sewell said to Deslat to give the men a bid on these 10 trucks of just $75 over cost. In other words, they're going to get a good deal on these trucks. By the way, to the right there on the image, you see Deslat's deposition or his statement to the FBI, essentially saying to the FBI exactly what I'm telling you. So Deslat goes back to the 2 men, and after he writes out a bid form, he and Sewell go back and they write out an official bid form, and they put on the bid the name of the organization they call Friends of a Democratic Cuba. And Deslat looked at the form and said that as they were offering it to the men, showing them the price, et cetera, showing them the paperwork, One of the men said, by the way, you'd better put my name down there because I'm the man handling the money. So this all seems routine. None of this is catching anybody's attention or anything. This is just going to be a good sale and a nice commission. And Sly asked, well, what's your name? And the man replied, Lee Oswald. And so on this next slide, you'll see this on the bid form that I've got circled there in red, that he writes in the name Oswald. And this is sort of just like an extra notation he adds because the man asked him to add it. That's the thing you'll notice. All of these Oswald sightings, these doppelgangers, they will go out of their way to make sure everybody knows who he is or who he's pretending to be. So you see on this bid form, which he produced to the FBI, this is evidence, right? The circle on the left is the Friends of a Democratic Cuba, backing up or corroborating his story. And then on the right, you've got the name Oswald. And then you see, if you scroll down a little bit, where it says FOB total, and it says plus 75 there. And that's based on what his boss had told him. We're going to offer them the cost of the vehicles just $75 over cost. So anyway, that is on January 20, 1961. And of course, after the assassination, when, you know, they didn't have any reason to remember that. It wasn't anything that stood out in their mind until the assassination. And all of a sudden, you know, they've got this paperwork with his name on it. And the guy remembers the man. He looked like Oswald. He identified himself as Oswald. So he came forward. He told the story. Of course, this is a problem for the timeline because Oswald's in Minsk at the time, and it's documented. Then we fast forward to the year 63. And I told this story in episode 21, but I want to flesh it out a little bit today. It's the Odio story, and I told it yesterday in the context of the Mexico City saga and how this story contradicts the official version of the narrative that Oswald was in Mexico City. And of course, there were a lot of contradictions to that, namely the pictures and the voice recordings and all that. But this story contradicted it as well. But today I want to look at it in the context of the doppelganger. And of course, you remember the story. 3 men showed up at Sylvia Odio's apartment, and they claimed to be members of JUR, which is an anti-Castro organization, Junta Revolucionaria Cubana. It's an anti-Castro group. And Sylvia Odio's father had been a member of this and was currently under arrest in Cuba. And so they are petitioning Sylvia, and of course her sister was there, Annie, and they're visiting them. It's an unannounced visit. Sylvia doesn't even know them. They just showed up on her doorstep, and they're trying to raise money and support for their organization. And they figured Sylvia would be a good mark because of what's happened to her father. So if you remember the story, the 2 Cubans introduced themselves as Leopoldo and Angel. And the gringo, that's what they refer to the white guy with them, they call him the gringo American, was introduced as Leon Oswald. Now, to this point, Leon Oswald hasn't said anything. The Latins, which is what they call themselves, they're actually Cubans, are doing all the talking, according to Sylvia. And Leopoldo said to her, quote, "We wanted you to meet this American. His name is Leon Oswald. He is very much interested in the Cuban cause." And Leopoldo goes on to talk, and he's telling her that they had just come from New Orleans and are about to go on another trip. So they're dropping names, and obviously Leon Oswald, and they want her to remember that name. And they're dropping the name of the town, New Orleans, which is, of course, where Oswald is from. And I put on here these 2 pictures. The Warren Commission is trying to figure out who these people are, Leopoldo and Angel. I told you yesterday about Angel. If you remember, Angel was the guy pictured, Angel Cruz was the guy pictured with Oswald leafleting in New Orleans in the summer of 63. And here he is again with him allegedly in Dallas, standing on Sylvia Odio's doorstep. As far as Leopoldo, most people, researchers, believe that it is this man, Bernardo de Torres. I've got a red circle around his face, and he is oftentimes referred to as Leopoldo in the Cuban circles, and he was seen with Oswald on multiple occasions. So the assumption is it's this guy, an angel, somebody who's been leafleting with Oswald. In other words, these two people have been with the real Oswald throughout the summer of 63. So it's not a stretch to believe when they show up and say they're with Leon Oswald, it might even actually be the real Oswald. Okay. And it wouldn't be a stretch to think that, except if you look at the date, September 25, 1963, there's a problem because according to the CIA and the FBI and even the Warren Commission, who believe the CIA and the FBI in this situation, Oswald is on the bus heading to Mexico City at this time. So how can he be two places at once, which of course he can't be. And as far as who they think or suspect, the Warren Commission suspects might be an impersonator or a doppelganger for Leon Oswald, they mentioned this guy's name. His name is Billy Seymour, and he has you could see a slight resemblance to Oswald. And Billy Seymour, it'd be a really interesting study, I think, a research project to go and look into all the doppelgangers who were ever identified by picture or by witness, whomever, and try to figure out who their real identities are. I think you would find, if you trace them back, and I've not done this, but I think you would find that they all have CIA connections of some sort. It wouldn't be a stretch. And that would tell you a lot about who's orchestrating this whole caper. But anyway, I just mentioned these because the Warren Commission mentioned them. They obviously looked into it a little bit, and they mentioned the name Billy Seymour as so even the Warren Commission, as skeptical as it was of anything conspiratorial around this whole situation, this whole scenario, the JFK assassination, even they recognized the possibility of doppelgangers with respect to Oswald, so much so that they included names in the report. Bernardo de Torres and Billy Seymour. Okay, so continuing on, 2 nights later, and I think yesterday I mentioned it was the next day, so there's a little bit of discrepancy there, was the phone call the next day or 2 days later. According to Sylvia, Leopoldo telephoned her and asked her, "What did you think of the American?" And she says, "I didn't think anything." Well, should I? I didn't know the guy. He just stood there and looked at me. And Leopoldo starts telling her about it. This is a follow-up call to hammer home, hey, you need to remember this guy. Remember his name, remember where he's from, and here, remember what I'm going to tell you about him. Direct quote, our idea is to introduce him to the underground in Cuba because he is great. He's kind of nuts. He told us, quote, you Cubans don't have any guts because President Kennedy should have been assassinated after the Bay of Pigs. It is so easy to do it. This is what Leopoldo is telling Sylvia on the phone about the man she just met either the day before or 2 days before, who was identified as that gringo, Leon Oswald. And he's telling her that Leon Oswald talks about assassinating President Kennedy, how easy it would be to do it. He's saying he's crazy. Leopoldo concluded the phone conversation by claiming that the American had been a Marine and was an expert shot, even though he's kind of loco, and repeating that he, Angel, and Leon Oswald were leaving on a trip. So it's like he's going out of his way to make sure Sylvia and her sister Annie, who was present at the first meeting, not with the phone call, but the first meeting, that they remember this man Leon, that they remember, or Sylvia at least remember, that he's a little bit nuts, he's crazy, he's loco, but that he thinks that the Cubans are weak-kneed because they didn't assassinate Kennedy after Bay of Pigs, and that he thinks it would be easy to do. And especially with his training, he's a former Marine, he's an expert shot. I mean, there's a lot packed in there, a lot packed in that story. And they want, and then they followed up with, hey, we're going on a trip, which might explain the whole Mexico City thing. They just got their days a little overlapped here because according to the Warren Commission and the evidence, somebody posing as Lee Harvey Oswald, or maybe it was the real Lee Harvey Oswald, was on a bus heading to Mexico City at this time. But here Leopoldo is mentioning here that they're preparing to go on a trip. And so I had mentioned earlier in another episode that sometimes these doppelgangers, it almost was like they were trying too hard. And either they overlapped days, which threw into doubt both events, or they were on top of each other. And two people were doppelganging at the same time, which makes no sense. They tried too hard and they tried to lay too much of an incriminating trail back to Oswald. And this is one of those cases. The timing is not lining up. And here's evidence of that. The Warren Commissions, what are they going to do with this? Because they already believe that Oswald is on a bus to Mexico City on September 25th. I mean, there was a record of a bus ticket and being sold to Lee Harvey Oswald. They have him leaving New Orleans on September 24th, after which he hitchhiked to Laredo down by the border and then bust across the border. And so what are we going to do with this story? According to the Odio sisters, plural, Leon Oswald was standing on their doorstep with Angel and Leopoldo, who are giving him all this incriminating information about this Leon Oswald and saying they're getting ready to go on a trip, et cetera, et cetera. But how can that be true? The Warren Commission said he's on a bus headed down across the border on this day. And the Odio sisters, who both positively identify Oswald, okay, when they asked, they show him the picture after he's arrested, they're like, yep, that's the guy. That's the guy. And of course, the Warren Commission went with the CIA story and said, no, that Oswald could not have been talking to the Odio sisters. They are mistaken because he was on that bus going to Mexico City. Which, of course, later they changed and said, well, actually, he wasn't in Mexico City because, the photo was so obviously fake and the recordings were not his voice. Now, all of a sudden, they're scrambling to cover up their mistakes or their subterfuge. But initially, they're saying that he was. And the Warren Commission believed him. And the Warren Commission did not believe the Odio sisters. And so if you ask me, I'm more hesitant to believe the CIA about anything related to Leon Oswald. And since I know the Odio sisters have no dog in this fight, no reason to lie, why would they lie? I'm more prone to believe them, after having studied this for as long as I've studied it. Now, after Oswald is arrested, obviously his face is splashed all over the news, TV and newspaper. The Odio sisters remember this, just like the Bolton Ford dealer. They remember that interaction. They remember that name. It kind of stands out when you sell 10 trucks or you think you're going to sell 10 trucks. And the guy claims his name is Oswald. And then the Odio sisters meet a guy whose name is Oswald. And here is the most famous man in the world at this time, whose name is Oswald. So people are it's going to stand out in people's minds, and they're going to go back and they're going to recollect this. And then when they see the picture, they're going to say, yeah, that was him. That was him. So you start putting his timeline together and you realize in the first case, he can't be at that Bolton Ford dealership and in Russia at the same time. And in the second case, he can't be in Dallas on Sylvia Odio's doorstep and in Mexico City at the same time. Now, again, if this happened once or twice, even twice, maybe even 3 times, you chalk it up to say, okay, faulty memory. Somebody got the wrong day. I mean, we've already seen Sylvia Odio couldn't remember. Was it the day after she got the phone call or 2 days after? That stuff happens, okay? But when it's not 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, it's over and over and over, you start to realize this is not a coincidence. In matters of conspiracy, there is no such thing as coincidence. This is all planned. It's all orchestrated. So that doesn't mean to say that it's always perfectly orchestrated. Sometimes they get a little overeager, a little over anxious, and they, like I said, they step on each other's toes a little bit. And that's a clue. That's a clue that this whole thing is orchestrated. So that is, those are two. I wanted to just briefly answer the question, was this even happening? And the authority on this would be J. Edgar Hoover, and he says it is happening back as early as 1960, when Oswald was in Russia. And then we have two follow-ups to that in 61 at the Bolton Ford dealership, and then in September of 63 at the Odio house. Now, I've got a lot more to come in future episodes. I just want to piecemeal this, and so that we just are careful about laying this out so you can see the breadcrumbs and where it's leading. And you can see the same pattern that I see over and over and over and over again. It's not the same witnesses. It's different witnesses. It's not the same cities. It's different cities. It's not the same times. It's different times. And so we will proceed with episode. This is episode 22. Episode 23, we'll pick up with the Mexico City story again and talk more about these doppelgangers. If you like what you're hearing, please feel free to subscribe to my channel. It's free. Also, feel free to hit the notification bell so you get notified every time a new episode drops, and hit the thumbs up button. I would appreciate it. And please don't forget, we welcome comments on the YouTube channel. If you have any information to add to this, please don't get too far ahead. Understand we're working our way along here. But if you have any information about this time frame, it'd be great to go ahead and add into that, so everybody's knowledge base increases. Until next time, thank you and have a great day.